You're listening to the Communications Business Advisor podcast, the podcast for communications professionals in the corporate world who are committed to advancing their work and our field's reputation as critical business advisors that are not only invited to the decision-making table, but are required there. I'm your host, Tara McDonagh.
Hello, and welcome back to the Communications Business Advisor podcast. I'm your host, Tara McDonagh, and I'm glad you're here for this one because this episode is a turn. If you've been listening this season, you know we've been in some heavy territory. We talked a few episodes ago about what happens when the world feels like it's too much, and the instinct is to go quiet, close ranks, isolation veiled as independence. And then last week, we went deep on helpfulness, how it built most of our careers and how at a certain point it starts working against us. Now, both of those episodes were about naming something, a feeling, a pattern, something that's been operating in the background that most of us recognize the second that we heard it named out loud. But this episode is a little different. This is the one about what's on the other side. The room that changes things. Now, but first, before we get into that, a quick update. The Shoreline, our new community for women in communications, those who work in public relations, public affairs, corporate communications, internal communications, in any kind of environment, corporate or agency or consulting, that's open now. And the first 40 members who join can get in at the founding rate using the code NEWCREW. I'll put the link in the show notes. And Raise the Tide Surge, which is the program that you've heard about from me before. This is the flagship year-long advisory room for senior women in the communications field in a corporate, or I should just say in-house environment. That's closing enrollment after our April 27th retreat. So if either of those are on your radar now is the time also to act. Links are in the show notes. Okay, here we go. I'm going to start with something that I think a lot of you will recognize. Let's say that you're working through something, a decision that has some weight or impact to it. Maybe it's like how to position a significant organizational change, or how to handle a dynamic with an executive that's gotten complicated, let's say. Or maybe it's figuring out whether the strategy that you've been executing is actually the right one, or whether you've been too close to it to see what's not working. And let's say you're thinking it through. You're thinking through this decision that has some weight. You're capable, you're experienced, and you know this field. So you turn it over in your brain. You consider all the angles, and you land somewhere that feels pretty solid. Maybe not perfect, but solid enough. And then you get into a conversation with someone who actually understands your world. They get your field. And about 10 minutes in, they ask you something. One question, and the whole thing shifts. And it's not because they know more than you or because they have some information that you didn't have. It's just because they weren't inside your head. They didn't share your assumptions, and so they asked the question that you stopped asking. And you might even beat yourself up a little bit about this. You think, how did I miss that? That moment, that specific experience of your own thinking getting better because someone else was in the room with you, that's what this episode is about. And please remember, we're supposed to have that kind of experience, and we're not supposed to beat ourselves up about it. So let's talk about that. I say this a lot. Judgment sharpens in dialogue. That's not a motivational line. It's a description of a real thing that happens. Here's what I mean. When you've been working on something alone for a while, and at senior levels, a lot of your most important thinking happens alone, your thinking develops a particular shape. It gets efficient. It pattern matches. It skips steps that feels obvious because you've done this enough times to know how it usually goes. And that efficiency is genuinely valuable most of the time. But the problem is that efficiency and accuracy aren't the same thing. Your thinking alone is very good at the things that you already know how to think about. It tends to confirm existing beliefs, something called confirmation bias. And it tends to worry about the risks that you've always worried about. And it tends to miss angles, important angles at times. Not because you're not smart enough. Again, remember, we're not beating ourselves up. Not because you're not smart enough. It's because you're human. Hear that, superstar? Yes, you can be an overachiever and still not have it all figured out, because we all have blind spots that are invisible to us. By definition, that's how it works. But dialogue, it interrupts that. Judgment sharpens in dialogue. When you bring a real decision, not a hypothetical, a real thing that you're navigating right now, into a room with a person or people who understand your world, and that part's critical, something specific happens. They don't know which steps that you've skipped. And they haven't been living with this for 3 weeks or 3 months or whatever. So they ask the obvious question, the one that feels basic to them and turns out to be the one that you stopped asking. That's why the room matters. Now, here's where I want to get specific, because this is the part that I think gets glossed over. Not every room does this. Not every room. In fact, most rooms don't do this. There are rooms that can make you feel better. There are rooms that validate your thinking, tell you you're on the right track, remind you that you're good at this. And those rooms, they have value, real value. We all need to feel supported. And it should be part of your approach to how you build your career to have rooms like that. But there's a real difference between a room that makes you feel better and a room that makes your thinking better. And confusing the two, it's actually a problem. A real problem. A room that validates is comfortable. A room that sharpens is occasionally uncomfortable, but in the best possible way. It's the experience of having an assumption you didn't even know you were making, getting surfaced and questioned. It's the experience of finishing a conversation with a clearer picture of what you actually believe. Not because someone agreed with you, but because someone pushed back just enough in just the right way. The question to ask about any room you're in, does this conversation change how I think about the problem? Or does it just make me feel better about the position that I already had? Both have a place, but only one of them is the room where your thinking gets better. So, what makes a room capable of doing that? Because it's not just about finding smart people. Smart people, they're everywhere. That's not the thing. The first thing is shared context, not identical experience. In fact, that can actually hurt you. You don't need people who've had the exact same career path as you, or especially not people that work at the same company as you. But enough shared context that you don't have to explain yourself from scratch every time. So that when you say something like, the executive keeps pulling us in after the decision is already made. The room, they already know what that dynamic feels like and what's actually at stake in it. For communications leaders, this is specific. There are things about this work, that particular experience of being the person who has to tell a senior leader that his or her instinct is wrong, and the very precise way that you have to do it so that the message lands without the relationship taking a hit, that's something you cannot fully explain to someone outside the field. It takes too long. You lose the thread. You end up talking about context instead of the actual decision. The right room already has the context. So you can just think. You can just think out loud. Decisions sharpen in dialogue. Judgment sharpens in dialogue. The second thing is consistency over time. The value of the room compounds. The more someone knows about your situation, not just the snapshot that you brought today, but the longer arc of how you've been navigating it, the sharper the questions can then be. A conversation you drop into once or twice is useful. An ongoing space that accumulates context is a different thing entirely. The third thing is ensuring there's safety for honesty. And I mean real honesty, not the kind where you present your thinking confidently and wait for people to respond. The kind where you can say, I'm just not sure I'm handling this right. Or, I think I made a mistake and I just don't know how to course correct this, without it affecting how you're perceived. That's real trust. That's real honesty. That last one is almost impossible to get inside most organizations. The higher you are, the more your team needs you to be the one with the answers. You cannot think out loud in the same building where you need to maintain authority. It's not a personal limitation. It's just the reality of the role, which is why the right space, the right room, is almost always outside your organization. A person or people who understand your world but don't live in your specific one, who have no stake in your decisions other than wanting you to make good ones, wanting to help you and support you. I want to name something directly here because I think it sometimes gets in the way. The language around, finding your people or building your support network, it can sound like something that's nice to have when things are hard, like a luxury for when you have the bandwidth. No, let's reframe that completely, please. The room where your thinking gets better is a leadership strategy. Let me say that again. That is critical here. The room where your thinking gets better is a leadership strategy. The quality of your decisions, the ones that shape how your organization experiences communications, the ones that determine whether you get pulled in before decisions are made or after, is directly connected to the quality of your thinking process. And the quality of your thinking process is directly connected to who you're thinking with. This is not peripheral. It's not soft. This sits right at the center of how well you do this job. Think about the decisions you're carrying right now. The ones that feel heavy. The ones that you keep turning over. How many of those have you actually thought through with someone who could meaningfully change how you see them? Not someone who asked how you're holding up or provided a suggestion without context. Someone who asked what you might be missing. That's the conversation. And the leaders who have consistent access to that conversation, who've built or found the place where that happens, they make better decisions over time. Again, not because they're smarter, because their thinking has better friction in it. Yes, this is the one scenario where friction can actually be a good thing. We spend a lot of time in comms talking about reducing friction. This is where friction can benefit you. I want to close with something practical because I think it's useful to name what actually shifts when you're in the right room, when you have that right room. The most immediate thing is decisions, not just the big ones, the medium ones too. The judgment calls you're making constantly that maybe don't feel like big decisions, but accumulate into your reputation and your authority over time. How you respond to a request, that's really a test. How you position a recommendation to make it land with this particular executive. Whether you push back now or let this one go. How you make the case for budget or staff or external resources or even investment in your career growth when you've been told that's not going to happen. Those decisions get sharper when your thinking has been sharpened with the right person or people. The second thing is confidence, but a specific kind. Not the confidence of feeling validated, the confidence of having actually stress test your thinking and found it solid. Those feel similar from the outside, but they're very different on the inside. And the third thing, and this is the one that I see most clearly in the women that I work with inside the Raise the Tide Surge program, and with the communications leaders who engage me in ongoing counsel one-on-one, it's authority. Real authority. The kind that gets built through how you consistently show up in decisions, not through a title or through an announcement. When your thinking is sharper, your counsel is sharper. When your counsel is sharper, the organization starts to experience you differently. And when the organization experiences you differently, your room changes. You get pulled in earlier. Your perspective gets treated as required rather than optional. And that is the shift. And it starts with the room where your thinking gets better. So here's what I want to leave you with. You probably already know you don't have the right room yet. Or if you do, you know how rare it is and how much it's mattered. So if you don't have it, that's worth taking seriously. Not as one more thing on your to-do list, as something that directly affects the quality of your most important work. The room exists. It can be found. Be open to it. And what's on the other side of it is worth going looking for. If this episode resonated, please leave a rating and a review. It helps more communicators find the show, and we can ignite a whole movement when we spread the message. Until next time, keep advising, my friends. Always keep advising.
If you're interested in working with me to advance your work and your team's reputation as critical business advisors, never order takers, check out TaraMcDonagh.com. Thanks for listening to the Communications Business Advisor podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please leave a rating or a review. It helps people find us, and we can't ignite a movement without sharing the message. See you next time, where we'll continue to do the work to elevate our field's reputation and elevate the careers of the people in it. I created Raise the Tide to help elevate our field and the women in it. It's part community, part coaching, part professional development, and part mentorship. It encompasses all of these things because it takes all of these things to rise in your career. I asked a few Raise the Tide crew members to share what their experiences have been like in the program, and here's what they had to say. What's one major impact Raise the Tide has had on you?
It's so important to have community across any part of our lives, and that's one way that Raise the Tide has had a major impact for me.
I'm at a time in my career where I'm looking to grow both from a business advisor and personally. And what I will say is I'm not necessarily getting what I need in terms of coaching and growth internally. And that's where Raise the Tide comes in.
Raise the Tide has given me the confidence to go and advocate for myself and never allow status quo and be always pushing for more and knowing your value and your worth and not being afraid to advocate for that.
If you're interested in this program, head on over to TaraMcDonagh.com and complete the Raise the Tide form. A rising tide raises all ships, but we're not the ships. Together, we're the force of the tide, raising the ships for our entire industry.